In this recording, I wanted to talk about something that I've already covered in one of my other vlogs. But since this idea is super popular, especially with the people who have power over us, the wealthy, a lot of conservatives believe this. I feel like I really want to just tackle this topic again, and I'm going to give you guys my take on it. Okay, so successful people who believe in God will oftentimes say that them being wealthy is part of God's plan, that they were meant to be rich, they were meant to be successful. And what that would infer is that if you're like poor suffering, that too was part of God's plan. So I really wanted to clear this up because it doesn't really make a lot of sense if you know the Bible really well. And I'm just going to go into what we know about this idea from the Bible. So not just that, but when bad things happen, is it part of God's plan? Did God want people to mistreat you or for you to be abused? I've also heard people say that, they'll say that, well, because, people being horrible to you was all part of God's plan. He wanted that to happen. So what they're basically saying is that they wanted people to be ugly to you because it's part of God's plan. Now, this is actually a very sensitive topic, because a lot of Christians will do bad things in the name of God, and we've been dealing with that ever since the Dark Ages. Christians do bad things in the name of God because they feel like it's the right thing to do. So I really want to cover both topics, and I'm going to sort of let you know what the Bible says about both of these topics, and you can I'll leave you to come to your own conclusions about things. So okay, so in the New Testament, we do have an example of a rich person interacting with the Son of God. So Jesus wanted to make a point with what he said, and it's kind of like he wanted to make more than one point with what he said, obviously, but I think that it kind of gives us an example of God not really controlling our money or controlling what we do with our money. If you became rich, God doesn't really have control over what you do with your money, is basically the point. Or whether you became rich or didn't become rich, he's not really involved in that. It has nothing to do with spirituality. That has to do with the world. Wealth has to do with the world. So wealth is a worldly thing, and people could become successful. I guess you could become successful. I mean, if it was, I don't know, right circumstances, if you met the right people and everything just went correctly. I mean, that could happen. But the point is that according to the Bible, people can become rich, and God really had nothing to do with that. Or once they have the money, I mean, they can do whatever they wanted with it. God doesn't have control over it, because we know that because Jesus, when the rich man came to Jesus in the New Testament, and Jesus, and he wanted to know what he needed to do in order to be in the kingdom of heaven, Jesus told him to give away his money and give it away to the poor and follow him. Now, the rich man bucked against what Jesus said. So Jesus spoke for God. So Jesus speaks for God. As his son, he can speak for God. So what that means is that that guy, his wealth had nothing to do with God. So he became rich, had nothing to do with God. And once he had the money and he decided he was not going to do what God wanted him to do with it, God didn't stop that from happening. Nor did God did it say that he just went broke. So I mean, that kind of what we can infer is that God doesn't puppeteer us. He doesn't make it so that everybody has to give us stuff or deny us stuff. It's completely random. Lazarus is another example of this. Lazarus was a man of God, and he was poor, and he lived by the rich man's gate, and he suffered, and nobody gave him anything, and then he just eventually died a miserable death. And that wasn't part of God's plan, but it happened. And it made it so God gave him the honors that he would bestow upon prophets simply because he was so mistreated on this world by the people of this world. Again, this is an example of people literally just doing whatever they want, regardless of how God feels. So we have good examples. So a lot of people say that you deserve your misery because of God, and it doesn't work like that. If you're miserable, it's because people just decided they wanted you to be that way, or they didn't care about you. So If you were supposed to be miserable, if you were supposed to be miserable, then God wouldn't command people to be kind to you, because it would go against what he wanted. So like, God gave commandments to all human beings, and if you followed the commandments, like if everybody followed the commandments, nobody would be miserable, or very few people would be miserable, because everybody would be doing right by them. So it seems interesting that people claim that God wanted them to, bad things that happen to them, or for people to treat them badly, when it literally goes against the mandate that we were given as humans. Like, it goes against his teaching. So that's like saying that he tells you to be good to people, but he really doesn't want you to be good to people, because if everybody was good to each other, then bad things wouldn't happen, or people wouldn't treat each other badly. Therefore, you wouldn't be in your toxic situation. So a lot of people, of successful people, use that because they wanted to say that God supports their success and their happiness, you know. So it's kind of just like them saying that if you're poor, you deserved it. If we're rich and we deserved it, and it's been ordained, or God has given it their blessing, because they like that idea. It helps them reconcile the fact that they are successful and you're not successful. So it helps them process that. You know, they go through life thinking, I was just so fortunate, so lucky that I don't suffer. So it helps them. When they see other people who might have deserved, they get what they have and they never got, they're not going to get it. They're going to get bad deal through life. They have to reconcile it. And a lot of times they just simply say it was part of God's plan. But in reality, it wasn't. If you're successful, it's because you met up with the right people and you made the right moves within the system. You know, like if I were to meet the right psychopath, or, you know, whoever, may not be a psychopath, just connect with the right person. I scratch his back, he scratches mine, and we just start making deals and moves together and that kind of thing, and relationships and connections. And that's how you become rich. That is the world. That's not God. That's the world. Like, you're navigating the system, the world. Like, people, you know, sometimes people are just, they meet the right people and they connect with the right people and they make the right friends and they have the right connections, and that's what allows people to become rich. But that's the world. That's not God. Like, God is not of that. He's about spiritual. He's not about the worldliness. That's why the rich man giving away his money was a testament to this, okay? Like, not giving away his money. So that's why Jesus said himself, in order for a rich man to make it into the kingdom of heaven, that'd be the equivalent of a camel passing through the eye of a needle. Just think about that for a second. Like, Jesus is basically saying that these people, their success, their wealth has literally nothing to do with God, and a lot of times it's against God. So I don't know how they reconcile this idea of them being rich and successful and God wanting that, when it really literally goes against everything Jesus basically was saying. I mean, you know, I lived around these people, and there's nothing godly about anything that happens out here. And now we have people simply saying that it's all part of God's plan, when they don't act in a godly manner. They don't represent God. They don't do anything that's commanded of them by God. And they only talk about God when they want to justify their success over other people. So like, they'll say, well, yeah, I'm successful as part of God's plan. Like, you know, not to call the Hobby Lobby guy out, but I'm just like, dude, you're successful because you're a mover and shaker. You met the right people, you had the connections, and you brought something to the table that made other people rich too. And you were making the right deals. You were making the right moves. That's why it has nothing to do with God. It has nothing to do with God. It has to do with connections and deal making and knowing people and being, you know, the right parents, the right, all that stuff. That's not God. That's connections and worldliness. That's connections and worldliness. That has nothing to do with God. You know, people in the Bible were poor. So many. The prophets were poor. Jesus was poor, and you know, like, you know, they had mystical powers, maybe mystical. They could do, you know, had some of that. You know, they weren't really like super wealthy. I mean, David got wealthy, but he didn't start off that way. David got wealthy. He became a king. I mean, I don't know. When it comes to stuff like becoming a king, yeah. Like, he became a king and he became wealthy because he was a king. I mean, there's a couple of examples of people being successful in the Bible, but, you know, for the most part, it doesn't work that way. I mean, I'm just saying, like, you know, he was a king, he was a ruler, and that falls into like this whole different category. I think people can be successful. I don't know about super rich. But the point is that, None of that. It doesn't seem like, see, God doesn't encourage worldliness, which means that, the money thing, that's worldliness. Like, that's not encouraged. That's not something that people should strive towards. So that's why I said, if Republicans believe in God, fair enough. Some of them, maybe, but just because they claim to believe in God doesn't mean that they have like the good intentions that we associate with God. Like, they're very much about the money. And once these people get the money, they don't really care about doing right with it. I mean, they hoard it or they spend it on whatever they want. Like, they're not out saving the world with their wealth. I mean, I wish they were, but they're just not. That's why I said, only good thing that I've seen that came out of this whole situation is that I actually have a voice that I wouldn't have had things not gone this way. Because there's no way I would have made a channel and started talking about all of the, the stuff that how I see things. So I now have a voice. I would never have had it if it wasn't for the stalkers. So, I mean, you could say that was part of the plan, but when you got to really remember is that God always gets his way. And when stuff happens, it happens in spite of the people that were doing all the terrible things to you, not because of them, in spite of them. So like, when people do terrible things to you, it's because they're trying to stop you from doing what you're supposed to do. That's why you suffered. That's why you went hungry. These people were working against God, and he basically used that because he's omnipotent. He knows everything. He's all seeing, all knowing. So he knew that they were going to do bad things to you, and he didn't want that to happen. So he planned around it. It's like chess. God, you could say God is like a master chess player. Like, he knows that the enemy is going to plan a defense, and he he incorporates that in his plan so that he still gets the checkmate in the end. It's not because he wanted the people to kick you while you were down, or to mistreat you, or to starve you, or to do bad things to you. He simply planned around it. Like, he knew it was going to happen because people are free. They have free will. Nobody is bound. The prophets are free. The angels are free. Everybody's free, and they can do whatever they want. And that's why you cannot have a world that is completely free to do whatever it wants and have it so that God has control over man. It doesn't work both ways. Like, people say that, my abusive childhood was because God wanted that. No, it's because people were free. People were free, and, your people, whoever it was who abused you, had the freedom to do that, and they chose to do that. It's not what God wanted. Like, he could have simply knew that was going to happen and planned around it. But God is not a puppeteer. He doesn't control people. He doesn't force people to do what he wants. He gives them choices, and they just can either choose to obey or they can choose to buck. It has always been that way. Throughout the Bible, it's always been that way. I don't know why people still think that it's different. I was like, so when you read the Bible, the first thing you notice is that God basically has to tell people that they should fear him in order for them to respect him. He can use that. If they are of God, he doesn't have to like threaten them with force or with punishment. You got to remember that when you deal with hardened criminals and psychopaths, you have to punish them. You have to frighten them in order to get them in line, because that is God's only tool to govern us, to get us in line, to protect his people. So cities of old were destroyed by the angels of God. And the reason why is because they had to be, because evil, if left unchecked, will destroy us all. If he stopped punishing people or sending people to hell or destroying cities or whatever, like, and especially in the Old Testament, good people would not have been able to survive that. Like, the evil will win. If God does nothing, evil will win. Evil people are hard to control. Like, I know that better than anybody. You know how hard it is to deal with these evil psychopaths that I deal with, dude. If you come at them with nothing but good words, like, God would be he would be a joke if he didn't like send people to hell. He would be a joke. Like, in the Old Testament, especially before civilization, it got to the point where we can sort of self-govern. Like, we had kings. That's why I said that the kings, their purpose is to enact laws. That's why they've been chosen, to enact laws. That's what the Romans chapter was talking about. It's not that they can do whatever they want. They're here to enact laws that keep us safe from the monsters and stuff, so that God doesn't have to wrath in order to get people under control. So that makes perfect sense. And I think they misinterpreted it to make it seem like these monsters can just tell us whatever they want and we just have to obey it. It's not like that. So God sends people to hell because of New Testament laws, because he's not actually attacking and smiting people now. So he just condemns you to hell. In the Old Testament, he wiped you out, he killed you. But the point is that he has to be this way in order for people to respect him, in order for him to have any kind of control, power, influence, because we're all free. With that said, let me go ahead and close.